Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Super excited to be back after a bit of a hiatus and delighted to team up with you, Doug, again to have a conversation. Now, folks at home, if you're not familiar, we do this regularly where we surface and elevate to learn from leaders in the field who we believe have interesting perspectives and can provide you with a little bit of a hopeful view for the week ahead. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And this week's guest is Stephen Percy, who's the 10th president of Portland State University in Bridget's hometown. He was hired into an interim role from being dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs there, and became the full-time president in 2020. Welcome, Dr. Percy.
Hello there.
Well, we're delighted to have a conversation with you, and we know that you have announced your retirement coming up. So that's something we're excited to be able to draw from you the wisdom that you've gleaned, especially in your long career, but especially these last few years where it's been a wild ride to be a president, wild ride to be an interim. So thanks for your service. And I thought I might start by asking you what has been the most surprising part about your career?
I think the surprising part was that it was not linear. It wasn't planned. It just kind of happened. I was a department chair in the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. A vacancy opened up in an urban research center where the mission wasn't quite clear and it had been drifting. So they asked me to go in and work in that. And I learned in that position the beauty of university community collaboration. And became kind of a center point in that center for connecting the university to the broader greater Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, and worked with foundations and nonprofits and grassroots organizations of color and so many different units to bring social science research and data gathering in a collaborative way to help rebuild communities. So I did that job for a long time. At the same time, I was teaching political science and public administration, but I just really loved that work. I got a chance with an incoming Chancellor Nancy Zimpher around 2000 to work on elevating university community collaboration and engagement to the highest mission of the institution. So I worked with her for that for a while. Then I went back to my center, and then they were creating a new school of public health, and they needed an interim startup dean. So I did that. So I finally entered the halls of deandom after not being in that for a long time. And then after that, I was recruited to the University of Baltimore. I was a founding dean of a College of Public Affairs, and then came to Portland State to be the dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs. And when our board and my predecessor parted company, I was asked to step in first as interim and then became president. So I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's been a great experience, but it sure wasn't linear, and a lot of it wasn't what I was planning. But I'm pleased it worked out that way.
Yeah, it seems like the presidency might have been the curveball that you weren't expecting in terms of your career, but it also makes total sense in terms of a career of public service, that this is kind of a form of public service that a lot of folks are not willing to do because it is such a challenging job, and especially being willing to step in 2019 and 2020. I mean, we have definitely seen that this role was impossible at times. So that is a real linear path, I guess, in some ways.
I'm curious, actually, what did you learn from being a founding dean, and what? Because I think it sounds like you've done that a handful of times, and I'm interested in sort of how that role differs from this sort of a little bit of a startup role that isn't necessarily all that common in higher education. How did that influence your presidency? How did it influence your thinking about leadership?
Well, I think when you're a founding dean, you have to start from a pretty holistic perspective, because you're the person who's out there trying to sell the vision of this new college or this new unit. And that's a kind of an interesting challenge, because people get somewhat excited about the general concept, but you have to put the next level of detail and information together to make it work. Often we create these units, we're not hiring whole new groups of people, we're bringing existing people there, sometimes augmented by new people you're bringing in. And then you have to try to make sure that group has a cohesive vision and kind of moves forward. So in University of Baltimore, where I worked in the College of public affairs, we were pulling together other parts of the campus that related to professional and urban sort of issues, and we brought them together. So part of that's to make sure that group of people feels a connectivity together in the new unit and is supportive of the overall mission. And so it's a very exciting time. You get to share a vision with community, with funders, foundations, faculty, staff, and students and community. So it's kind of fun, but you need to sort of help people understand the vision and where you're headed so that they come on board with you.
That has to have been kind of helpful, I guess, as a president as well, because you're not really just telling people where you are. Although I guess in the last 2 years, it was kind of like, here's where we are. we're going to be okay. But you have to kind of articulate a vision that does not yet exist. So it takes a degree of creativity and your ability to kind of help people see that state, which I think is, those are really important skills for a president. I'm curious about, now that you've had this distinguished career all around the country, again, background of public service, interim president of Portland State, which is a really important institution in an important city that had definitely had some interesting years as someone who's currently there right now. I'm just curious about, as you zoom from that perspective out and just look at higher education, I'm wondering about what change you see is needed.
Well, that's such a really fascinating question, and I would love to get together with 10 other presidents and discuss that, because we'd have all kinds of ideas. Because one, higher education has been changing dynamically and rapidly for a number of years. Then you throw in the pandemic, which led to a lot of uncertainty. And so right now, I think we're all trying to sort out what's the direction our institutions will be in and how we're going to move them forward. 3 areas I think are useful to think about, and one is similar to what I have taken as my first priority as president, and that's to advance racial justice and equity. The racial reawakening that this country has been going through is very important in higher education, because we provide so much opportunity when we do it right for people to advance themselves and to have social mobility and to create stronger and better lives for themselves. But we have to make sure as institutions that we are creating those institutions that are open and welcoming and supporting and engaged with students of color. We need to be doing this work in our community engagement work, in our curriculum, and in our student success. And we need to look at our ongoing policies and practices and procedures. So much of the things that actually reduce opportunity are things that are just things we've always done them that way, and they may even have some logic. Let me give you an example. Let's just say you give a scholarship out to the students, the senior students in a particular department, on the basis of merit. That is, they have the highest GPA or they've excelled in other ways academically, and we give out the scholarships on that basis. Well, that's something that a merit principle we've all been pretty used to, right? But if the people that are doing meritorious work are those who've had more privilege from the start, then boy, we may just be rewarding privilege and not trying to reward the actual capability and successful opportunities that students face. So we just need to rethink all the things that we do to make sure that they're providing opportunity to all of our students and helping them be successful. And in student success, we have to look at student learning outcomes broken down by different ethnic and racial groups to make sure that the work we're doing is having impact across all of our students. Second of all, I think this is a really exciting time to be rethinking instructional pedagogy and modality. We certainly have been learned how we can pivot to remote and online learning. And we've also then realized that there's a middle ground we sometimes forget between totally in person and totally online. Is the whole hybrid. That's some connectivity, which may be able to allow you the benefits of in person with some of the flexibility that online provides. So I hope people will be thinking about, I'm encouraging our faculty to think about modality and pedagogy. I'm also really interested in new ways of packaging learning. We've had a system of majors and minors and certificates for a long time. Maybe just be fine, but we may be able to do stackable degrees. People are talking about that now. You take clusters of learning in different areas and put it together in ways that may be able to fashion more interesting and relevant degrees by packaging existing knowledge in new ways. And as we're looking at climate action work, something new, we see interdisciplinary opportunity abound here. We were thinking about stackable degrees might be a way of doing that. Thirdly, I think it's really important that universities try to find ways to be relevant to the social and economic conditions of the time. Now, I know that's not totally new. I totally get that. But there are certain problems where that are wicked problems. They're difficult. They require multiple disciplines, multiple perspectives. They require some convening. They require some support and some research. And I think that universities can help play a role in helping to propel our communities and our states and our nation forward in areas like climate action, racial justice, workforce development. And I just wanted to encourage all of us to think about how we can be even more relevant in today's world by helping to make positive change.
That's super helpful. I feel like you've gotten you've got the direction for the field. Doug, I don't know if you had a follow-up.
Well, I was curious. I mean, some of the things you talked about require pretty significant rethinking and reimagining on the part of a lot of constituents, some of whom may have more and less incentive to want to make those changes. And I'm curious how you think about sort of the leadership challenge of probably persuasion of, okay, you instructors should, I want you to think about different ways of delivering your curriculum. And I guess I'm just curious sort of whether how receptive in general you find your colleagues at Portland State, but more generally, how well positioned do you think this enterprise is to make what are pretty significant changes, and how you go about it as a leader driving in that direction?
I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm very excited about it, but you'd have to bring people along with you, not do top-down sort of announcement. I'll give you one example. I came to Portland in 2014. In 2015, I read that the New Yorker magazine article called The Big One, which is talking about this major earthquake that we could have. It only erupts every 300 years. We don't get earthquakes very often, but when that's hit, it's like a 9.0. So what are we doing as universities to help prepare for that? So I was aware of emergency management in my public administration field, but when I looked at the landscape in Oregon, I didn't see any other higher education institutions have any graduate programs in resilience and emergency management. So I thought this was interesting. I immediately thought it was multidisciplinary. It was bigger than the college for which I was the dean. And so I said, how am I going to approach this? So I talked to my fellow deans and said, I want to pull together people on this campus who have some interest in some element of emergency management and community resilience. I said, sure. So I called the faculty together. We worked together. We built a curriculum. We didn't hire any new faculty, but we used existing curriculum. We talked about some other units in campus that weren't involved to get involved, like we asked our communications department to create a risk communications course, and they did that. So we created a degree together by pulling together. But the key was that the people that came together had a common interest. And they were all from different academic disciplines, most of them, but they found this common interest in a thematic area of emergency management. So we built it together. We put it together. What I could do as a dean is help figure out how we were going to govern it. I could help bring resources to help in the planning, and I could help figure out a way to bring that degree, multidisciplinary degree, into the institution in a way. But it was the energy of the people that are very much involved. So when I termed as president to begin last year thinking about climate action, what I did was I said to the campus, I think this is important. I gave the rationale why it was important to our community, to our state and our nation. Now, that's not a very hard sell. People kind of get that in our academy. But then I said, I want to hear from you. So I convened dialogues and symposium and got people involved. I said, this is multidisciplinary. Everybody has a role they want. And so a lot of ideas emerged from the conversation and the dialogues, areas where we might specialize, how people can get involved, and people were enthusiastic. So I got a lot of support, but it was kind of naturally there. But by identifying the issue, explaining the rationale, and saying, I want you to help figure out how we as a campus could be much more pivoting toward climate action work in a multidisciplinary way. I've got a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of ideas about working together in new ways. So it was stimulating people's interests and common feelings and beliefs to their own, linking it to their knowledge to come together. And I think that's how you do it.
I think it's obviously using your skills as a founding dean too. You're kind of inviting people into this vision for the future. I do think that people often are they're incorrectly assuming that some people in the academy are against change and some people are for it. And I would just say it's, as someone who works on innovation, it's like, listen, you only like the change you like. If Doug, if I came and rearranged your office without telling you and you went in there, you wouldn't like it, right? Like if people think that they like change, they only like the change they like, that they see and that they want. So it's really about inviting people in to see that vision and to feel like it's not happening to them, which I know the word buy-in feels sometimes like people are being a means to an end, but it really is a intentional like cultivation process of inclusion, of helping people get their voice heard in the process of setting a vision. So anyway, I totally, now I see the through line between your founding dean experience to why you would be able to do this, and the connection between those. So
the trouble with change is that the structures and things like disciplines and departments and units and shared governance and faculty governance, that's all very important elements of what we do. And I think sometimes people think it's a structural organizational development issue. How do you then come together in a new way? And one way is to kind of break it all apart and rebuild it, which may be useful in certain situations. But I find a much more useful approach is more of a network approach. How can people stay where they are, but you blend them into new networks of coming together? That eventually may lead to departments merging or other things changing, but try to create the connectivity without having to disrupt everything else. And I think that's part of my approach, is how do we pull ways of new ways of working together. And I've got a task force I'm working with the faculty senate and the faculty right now to try to get rid of the impediments to interdisciplinary work. People are afraid, who's going to count the credit hours when you teach? How am I going to get credit for this in my department? How does this relate to promotion and tenure? We're smart enough to figure that out, and people are willing, but I think you need to bring people along to figure, okay, how do we make sense of this so that the traditional, I don't like to silo bash, because I think that silos have been there, the disciplines are created, they've done a lot of things, but how to connect across those silos and help people find ways so that they feel appreciated and rewarded when they do that is part of the challenge of leadership, but I think we can do it.
Great. That's super helpful. All right, so I want to turn back to just you in general. I'm curious about what you're most proudest of in your career. What is something that you've done that, especially as you're doing this reflection, I assume, in this last chapter, is there something that stands out as like a moment that really has been the most significant?
Well, I always approach those questions with a bit of humility, because you're still living and learning all the time. One of the things I've been most excited in my own career was to appreciate and learn and value and then promote university community collaboration. I saw it in so many different ways. I was raised in a traditional academic environment, and I had a traditional academic way of thinking about things. And then when I got to work in community, and I learned that there's knowledge in community that can inform instruction, that can inform research. There's knowledge that we can bring to community to make changes, and we can do this in a collaborative way. And that may sound Pollyanna, but I don't believe it. I believe there's a lot of ways we can come together and learn, and it's a mutuality that are, when we do community engagement well, and let knowledge serve the city, as PSU's motto, is a mutuality of knowledge, learning, sharing, and growing. And it can be so useful for the tremendous power of knowledge creation and instruction and opportunity creation that universities can bring. But you need to do that in a really meaningful, authentic dialogue and interaction with community. But I can think there's such a richness that the boundaries of the university begin to kind of fade away into this community connectivity that allow students to learn better, our research to be better, our research to be more targeted to needs, and to actually help build our community and raise up our community by working together. So that's one very exciting part of it. It's been a joyride to have all these different administrative types of positions in higher ed. You get to see so many different dimensions of the academy and how it works and what the challenges are. So that's been kind of a really interesting opportunity. And one of the biggest challenges, but surprising parts of my career, was dealing with a pandemic. During the pandemic, as any president would know, that which was usual became unusual. That which was a typical practice had to be questioned and thought about. So, for example, just offering classes, that's usually a pretty routine procedure of figuring out what classes and curriculum you're going to offer. But we had to be thinking all the time, what about modality? What about the health issues? What about our buildings? What about our safety? What about remote learning? And so what happens is we got a huge disruption, and we're still figuring that out. Does everybody want to come back to work or not? Do students want to learn remotely or not? We learned that there's a certain flexibility in remoteness. But we also learned there's a lack of humanity and a lot of interconnection that can be very helpful to people. And for example, high touch practices for our students who may have more challenges in learning. So putting all those pieces back together is interesting. They won't come back exactly the same way, but I think we've learned something out of it. But we're also trying to heal from the great pain and disruption it's been causing. So that was unexpected, to be sure, but I think everybody in higher ed can say the same on that.
Yeah, well, but one thing you have experience in, and speaking of unexpected, talk to us a little bit about leading after sort of an unexpected transition. Sometimes it's going from an interim role, but how do you see leadership when it has happened for reasons people that are unexpected?
Right. I stepped into the presidency, as I mentioned, when our board and my predecessor kind of decided to part company. And when I stepped into the situation, that disruption had caused some challenges. There had been also some pretty rapid reorganization prior to my stepping in, and that had caused disruption. And I found that my first job was really to listen and to help people heal from that disruption it would cause. Now, that may sound simple, but it really wasn't. It was really something very important. I'll tell you the really simplest thing. There are doors into my office from the lobby area that are frosted. You can't see through them, and they were closed all the time. And the first thing I did was prop that damn door open and just said I want it open all the time. That was more symbolic for me, I thought. But I can't tell you how many people came and said, the door is open. You come in. That idea that you're approachable, that you were listening, that you were hearing what the challenges were, trying to soothe things over, help people feel positive and productive again and get things moving. And that can probably take different forms depending on the disruption. But some of those symbolic gestures are really important. People really need to know that. Now, I would say in that case, when a person came in and was not successful and kind of parted quickly, the fact that that I was an internal person that a lot of people knew. I had led some strategic planning. That meant I was working outside my own school or college. And so at that point, I think someone who was empathetic to their own community and understood it was a unique ability I had to sort of come in and listen. And they didn't have to sort of wonder who is the guy. They just had to wonder what the guy is going to do. But I think that was sort of something I learned on that. So I think that was sort of helpful in that transition.
I think that's great. And especially the note about symbolism and how some people might think that's like, soft and not super important, but it is very important. You're right, in terms of demonstrating a shift in leadership and openness. So I'm curious about our last two questions are kind of rapid fire for you as someone at this stage of your career. I'm just curious about what advice someone else gave you that was important, informative at some point in your life that you find yourself going back to and thinking is pretty profound for you.
When I say this, it may sound so self-evident, but I don't think it totally is. And so someone said, you have to listen to people. You need to listen. And that has struck me so importantly. You have to listen to concern and pain sometimes. You have to listen to ideas and innovation. You have to listen to feedback on your actions and your deliberations. And you need to do that in a empathetic way if you can. So let me say a little bit more about that. When I first started working as a white man in organizations of color, I had to realize that some of those organizations may distrust me just because, one, they didn't know me, and two, I didn't look like them, and three, they didn't know that I had any experience in the community. What did I ever do when I was working, invited to a table when I was running the research center? The first thing I always did is just listen. I came in, I greeted everybody, said, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I listened for a long time to what they had to say. When we're doing our racial justice and equity work here at the campus, I had to listen a lot. We spent a year of reflection, and you had to listen to anger. You had to listen to frustration. These were all very legitimate in the minds of people, but it wasn't the easiest thing. I was the president. I needed to hear that on behalf of the institution, on behalf actually of the history of the institution. But you have to listen. And you have to it creates with empathy. You have understand where people are coming from, and you can help try to figure your leadership to relate to that. Again, it may sound simplistic, but it's really pretty deep. Also, one thing as a president, you get to talk to all kinds of people. I can't tell you the wonderful ideas that people have come to me, and whatever reason was, they never were able to work their way up in the system. But some of them we've actually done because we listened to people. That's a great idea. And that comes from faculty, it comes from our staff, it comes from our classified staff, it comes from our students. So listening for ideas and things. I can't tell you how many great ideas have come from just listening to great people who thought about it, but didn't have another way to express it. So listening is really important. Even if it sounds simple, it's real.
No, it really is. And it makes me think about the advice that we frequently share. That's a rule from improv, which is focus on being interested, not interesting. Because there is something about when you're listening or when you're talking, your ears shut off. You can't hear. So that is great. And I think as a leader, especially one who needs to, calm and stabilize, or one leading during the total chaos of the past few years, that would be an incredibly valuable attribute. Well, the last question is, especially as a dean working in public service and talking about public service and inspiring young people to work and give their lives to public service, I'm sure you've had an opportunity to give advice to folks early in their career thinking about leadership. And I'm just wondering if there's any different advice that you find yourself most consistently giving people who are thinking about leadership.
Well, again, I would say developing your own sort of equity lens, that is developing a lens, a way of set of internal questions that relate to whenever you're thinking about creating something, implementing it, or evaluating it. What's the impact on people who traditionally have been marginalized? And I think that is a very important attribute to develop. It takes a while to do that. You have to be willing to be out there. You have to be able to admit your own vulnerability and your own internal prejudice. But I think that's really helpful if you can begin to build that into your work, which is just a way of stopping to think sometimes about, wait a minute, what's the impact of this going to be if we do it? Again, the empathy skills, can you listen and try to understand where people are coming from? I think that helps you a lot. Sometimes I think we have a vision, well, this group's going to be angry at me, or this group has this position, so I'm going to take that position. No, listen, because sometimes that listening, I remember I was working on an issue with, as a dean, on a group of people that was looking at an issue about different pay rates or pay grades or status appointments in a group of people. And a group of people were really saying we really need to expand the range of those. And I kept trying to figure why. I didn't understand it. But we talked together. I finally understood what it was, is they didn't have the same chance for promotion opportunities on a regular basis that other people had, just because the way we set it up. Aha, there's the issue. So we worked together and we crafted that. Then I was immediately on board and we found a way to do that. And I'm just trying to say, by listening and being empathetic, you're trying to say, where are people coming from that this is an issue? Then we can figure that sort of thing out. So I think that's really important as well. And again, if you know me, I believe collaborative practices are very important all the time. That can slow it down a little bit, or sometimes it doesn't create the fastest action. But if you can work collaboratively from the beginning, then you build this authentic partnership that then can help propel you forward.
That's great. That's wonderful advice for folks to start their week. Thank you, President Percy. It's been a delight to get to know you over the past 2 years, and thank you for your service, especially during a difficult time navigating and helping support Portland State really lead into the next chapter. Doug, always wonderful to have you as my co-host, and I look forward to future episodes. Folks at home, we hope this gives you that little bit of boost and perspective to start this week with as much positivity as possible, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.